It's another beautiful Sunday afternoon. This is Rubbin Minds. Welcome. My name is Ebuka Obiuchendu. Thanks a lot for joining us. Politics is still very heavy in the air, but we can't talk about the country today without still looking at the flooding issues that seems to be bedeviling every single corner of this country and is affecting a lot of other things. We've seen what is done to the distribution of fuel, for one. Most parts of the country are experiencing a scarcity today because parts of the country have been cut off by the flooding. We've been told we're going to start seeing the effects on food as well. We're not sure how soon that's going to happen, but inflation is biting hard. We're hearing crazy numbers with what the Naira is doing against the dollar today. Finally crossed over the 800 Naira mark. Makes you very, very scared for what's to come in the days ahead. But the CBN says they have plans to cushion what they say is need to mop up liquidity in the market by changing the face of the Naira and mopping up everything that's in circulation in the next couple of months. We don't know what effect that would have. Many analysts have had a lot to say. But we keep our fingers crossed and just hope we can make it through in the coming months because things are really, really tough. But in all of that, politics continues to dominate the headlines. 2023 is fast approaching, and the elections in February is all everybody seems to be holding on to see what next is in store for this nation. We're going to be looking at that on the show today. What factors will shape the elections in February next year and what you as a voter should be looking out for. I have here with me a legal practitioner, Adeola Onikoyi. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So you hear all of these things I've talked about. There's so much happening in the country today, but you know, for the longest time, it looked like security or insecurity would be
the biggest issue.
The biggest issue in the ballot or on the ballot in the next couple of months.
Right.
But the economy seems to be in dire straits now, much more than ever. We're not sure. What do you think matters more now to the voter? What should matter more?
Honestly, it's always the economy. Right. It's always the economy, every election, all around the world. And so I believe insecurity, yes, insecurity is topmost. But if I were to rank it at this point in time, I would say the economy. I would say the economy because things, as you said earlier on, are getting harder. Things are getting harder and, you know, people can't even afford basic amenities. And with all that's happened with the flooding and everything, it's really, really hard on people. And so people are looking at the elections, right? And they're looking at the candidates and they're looking at their economic plans and saying, you know, what do you have for us? How would you stop this downward slide that we're on? Because we're on a downward spiral.
Yeah. So what do you want to hear from the candidates? You know, when you're talking about the economy now, what do you want to hear from the candidates? What should we be looking out for? What should they be saying at this time? Because this is a time where we're going to be hearing a lot of promises.
Yes, of course.
Which is a fact.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, we need to hear concrete plans. A lot of analysts have said they feel very bad for whoever's going to be president next year because you're walking into a very tough job.
Yes.
What should we look out for?
To be fair, the Nigerian presidency is always a tough job. I think in each candidate's economic plan, soccer for the people is one of the topmost priority for people. How are you going to alleviate these sufferings? The fuel price keeps rising, right? It keeps going up. And not only does it keep going up, then we encounter these intermittent scarcities. How are you going to solve that? If you just tell us, okay, you're going to remove subsidy, what is the effect of that? How would that affect the common man, right? The upward trend in inflation, how are you going to stop this? Because quite honestly, it seems the CBN has no clue. It seems they're just coming up with policy after policy that, for lack of a better phrase, pops up in their head, right? And we just need to look out for how the candidates would be able to solve these things, right? And give us not a socialist manifesto per se, but because, you know, they all have their own ideologies, but a manifesto that works for the Nigerian people,
Yeah.
Yes.
I hear you. I'm going to come back to you. Let's quickly go to Abuja now. We're joined in Abuja studios by Dr. Tobi Oluwatola, who's a policy analyst. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Oluwatola. I want to find out from you, same question. I mean, what do you think is topmost on voters' minds now? We just talked about security and the economy. Some will say there's a third one even with regards to unity of the nation. There's a lot of people who believe we're the most divided at this point than we've ever been at any point in our nationhood. What should be topmost on voters' minds at this moment?
Thank you, Ebuka, and I will agree with the first speaker that the economy is topmost on most people's minds. But we did a study we did a survey of about 13,000 young people, and 42% of them said security is the most important issue, because ultimately, security is what ties everything together. The economy cannot work optimally if people are not safe to go to their farms, if people are not safe to come and invest, if people are not safe to create jobs, the economy cannot work. So ultimately, first and foremost, the constitutional duty of the state is to provide security. And the reason why we give up some of our freedom to the state is so that the state, with its monopoly of violence, can sort of provide security for us. So when the state then ends up not being able to do that, or even in certain cases being the source of violence against the people, then democracy really falls apart. So security will be number one. The economy is important. We've got about 83 people living below the poverty line, and that number is going to grow. We've got about 30 million Nigerians who don't have a job, even though they want to work. We've got about 40% of our population who cannot read and write. So there are lots of problems. So, but you did say about our national unity, absolutely. I think that a very critical issue going into 2023 has to be how we renegotiate our unity and what it means to be Nigerian, what the roles of the various levels of government ought to be, so that on a more localized level, where the government is closer to the people, they can be held more accountable for delivering on the services that the people rely on democracy to deliver for them.
I like that you use that word accountable there, because, I mean, it's fair to say that all three issues are going to be topmost on everyone's mind, to be honest, because the economy, security, the unity of this nation, these are things that are at the front burner of the conversations everybody has today. But accountability continues to come up, and it's a question I like to ask, because Nigerians have never been short of making promises or of having great policies or great fixes. We always say that we falter when it comes to now implementing those things or coming through with those promises made. How do we start, especially at this phase where the promises are being made now by all of those candidates, to, have a sort of system where we say, okay, if you don't do this, this is what happens? Is there a way to hold people accountable? Yes, we can say, okay, if they don't deliver, we'll vote them out in 4 years. But is that enough? We've seen that it's not really enough, is it?
It's a good point. It's certainly not enough, and it's a little too late many times, because that's 4 years of poverty, 4 years of deprivation that has already happened before the consequences are felt. And I think, to your question, this is where the media play a role, but also the other parts of government, which is the legislature, the judiciary, also have an important role to play in our democracy, which they have either not played effectively. So far in our democracy, we've had an essentially rubber stamp legislature, which is why when I talk to young people in the run-up to 2023, I tell people it's not just about electing a good president. Because you go ahead and elect a good president, a good man to the presidency, and he's got to work with the legislature, he's got to work with the civil service, he's got to work with the system. And we've got to get to work fixing the system. And I want to narrow in on accountability a little bit, because the accountability mechanism of democracy really bothers strongly on two elements of government, two elements of society. One is the media. The Constitution of Nigeria, Section 22 and 39, give responsibility to the media to hold elected officials accountable. When the media go out and do that job, do the investigative work of journalism, and they bring out, they show us. So part of what the media has to do is really to account for, look at all these policies and the promises that people are making, and then do let's measure, let's see if people are delivering, and where they're not, let's put that out there in the media and let the people and their elected representatives do something about it. And in many cases, if the legislature cannot do something about it, perhaps the judiciary, their judicial recourses, if the judiciary is allowed also to be independent and free. So because there's also an independent angle to this, both for the judiciary as well as the media. So that's one way to tackle accountability.
All right, I'll come back to you. Let me come back to Adeola here in the studio, and this sort of leads me to the question of trust as well, which has always sort of defined sort of voter turnout or interest in politics in any way. People always tell you, these guys are going to go in there, they'll do what they want to do, they're going to do what they want to do. Why should I bother coming out to vote anyways? And apathy feeds this system ultimately. This trust deficit continues to be a question with voters. Are you sensing that is different right now? When you see the lineup of candidates, do you see any reason why people might be as excited as they should be? Yes, there are certain candidates that have sort of, ignited interest in people.
Of course.
But at the same time, you have people saying, but they're still a part of the old stock anyway, So what is different this time, and how should we sort of navigate that trust deficit at a time like this when it's at an all-time low?
Right. I would say I see more of fanaticism, right? People being a bit too overzealous for their candidates than trust. I think trust is still very low in our society when it comes to politicians. Even people who have, who are ardent supporters of certain candidates, if you sit them down and you talk to them one-on-one, they would still tell you, and we know maybe they wouldn't do everything they promised, but at the end of the day, he's our person, he's our guy. So the trust deficit, it starts from the top, right? I believe it starts from the top, and the government, either the government of the day, the government of days past, they have to be truthful to the people. Time and time and time again, we cannot count the times the government has lied to us, only for us to find out that, the opposite is the truth. I can count examples, but I wouldn't go into examples. Right, and over and over again. So it has to start from the top, and the government has to realize that it doesn't hurt to say the truth. You need to talk to your people. You need to give them a certain level of transparency, full transparency, if I may say. But we don't have that in this country. And so I think the trust deficit is still very low. How do we overcome it? As I said, it starts from the top. And we as a people also need to be very careful, right, of the type of expectations we put on our politicians. Right, we need to understand that if someone is elected, and just because you have free access to them, it doesn't mean they would sponsor your child's school fees, right? It doesn't mean that they would sponsor your entire family abroad and things like that, because there's somewhere this money is coming from, and they can't tell you the truth. They can't. So
a very good leaner from that. A very interesting quote I like to remember every time is from Banky W, when he said, "We have to learn to meet Nigeria where it is, not where we expect it to
exactly.
be." It's such an amazing quote. But leading up from something that Dr. Oluwatola said in Abuja, is about this, the National Assembly, and the conversation about how we constantly pay too much attention or focus all our energy on the presidency continues to come up. And it looks like we're going down that line again.
Yes.
All the conversations you see, whether it's on social media, whether it's one-on-one, is about these 3-4 candidates every single time. Nobody seems to know who the Senate candidates of their constituencies are. Nobody seems to know anything. And it looks like we're going down that line again, where we're going to place all of these expectations in the center and expect magic to happen, isn't it?
There's a reason for that. It's very simple, the Constitution, right? The way our Constitution is structured, the way our Constitution is, the president is a very, very powerful person. It's a very powerful position. Now, in theory, right, there should be separation of powers, and the legislature should be able to challenge the executive, but in reality, it rarely ever happens, right, because the executive holds so much power, And so, yes, it's because of that we see that. But we as a people also have to become better informed, right? We have to put it upon ourselves to say, okay, who is going as a House of Rep member for my area? Who is my State House of Assembly member? Who is my senator, right? You have to know these things, because if you reach out to them, they are your direct representatives. I don't know how many people send emails to the presidency and it gets answered. But I can speak for my constituency that, yes, I have sent emails to my rep member and he has replied. So there are some responsive members like that. There are some who are not, but you would not know if you do not try.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. Let's go back to Abuja now, Dr. Oluwatola. I want to talk about the process now, and probably INEC in particular. People have said so far things are not looking as bad. Everybody's excited about the new Electoral Act, which is expected to be a game changer next year. But there's also fears. We started seeing figures in the past week about, illegal registrations, the number of voters who registered illegally, and the numbers are looking quite scary. In certain states, we've got people quite nervous. How excited or nervous or worried are you about, INEC in particular, and the entire process with the way it's shaped up so far? It's the longest campaign season we've ever had. 5 months of official campaigning has never happened before. So I don't know what your expectations are.
So thank you, Ebuka, and I recall that you and I were in a session with the chairman of INEC recently on the electorate, where we got to grill him on these questions personally. And my take really is that INEC is doing the best it can to make sure we have credible elections. And we've got to be careful not to fall in the ditch on either side, one side being the side that is not vigilant to potentials for malfeasance, but also the other side of the ditch where we lose trust in the electoral umpire that then leads to mistrust at the end of the voting process, and that can lead to chaos after election. So we've got to be careful not to fall in the ditch on either side. Listen, the Electoral Act gives a lot, really solves a lot of the problems that people had historically with manipulated elections. On the one hand, people are not going to be able to register just on the basis of being or just on the basis of being a registered voter. You have to be an accredited voter to register. And what does it take to get, so the Electoral Act provides, for a bimodal accreditation system, such that if your fingerprint doesn't work, then they can use the barcode on your registration, they can use your face, they can use your ID or your surname. So it's, but at the end of the day, people are going to have to be accredited to vote. And then the votes are going to be transmitted electronically, and almost in real time, INEC publishes it and civil society can see it in real time. So to a significant degree, the opportunities for rigging or for writing the numbers as we've been used to is significantly diminished in this electoral cycle. And we saw it play out in Ekiti and Osun. So I think that the people should focus more on playing their part, focus more on coming out to vote, focus more on paying attention to potential misinformation and disinformation that can be used to suppress votes in certain places, and paying attention to keeping themselves safe, in the run-up to as they go out to vote on election day.
Very quickly now, in one sentence, I don't know how quickly you can do this. I mean, polls are coming all over the place. We saw a Bloomberg poll that gave it to the Labour Party candidates. We saw a Fitch poll that came out a couple of days ago that's given it to the APC candidates. How much emphasis should people start paying to things like this as quickly as you can?
I think that the polls are indicative of a narrow segment of interest. I don't think that they're reflective of what election day would look like, but they're exciting.
What do you think about polls?
I like polls. Not something you hear very often. But yeah, I think we should look out for them. We should monitor them because they do represent the voice of the people, whether online or offline. They are real people. They're not bots voting at the end of the day. So we should look out for that.
I mean, this conversation is going to keep going on for the next couple of months. Thank you very much, Adiola. Thank you very much, Dr. Toby, for joining us in Abuja. We're going to take a quick break and come back. Please stay with us. Don't just stand there teasing me. Now it's time to show